Hello to everybody. Thank you very much for joining our webinar about Hypure Oil Reasons why it is the best option to optimize your embryo culture. My name is Gisela Maggiotto. I'm an embryologist and scientific advisor at Kitazato DBMed, and I will be moderating Dr. Nuno Costa Borges' presentation today. So please note that there is a chat in the right panel, and you can type in any question or comments during the presentation. And at the end, we will have a Q&A section. So everybody knows Nuno. He has an extensive professional career in the IVF field. He has published many scientific articles in the most well-known journals, and he's the scientific director of Embryotools in Barcelona, Spain. His talk is titled "All That Glitters is Not Gold: Details that Can Make a Difference Among Commercial Oils." So thanks, Nuno, for taking part of this webinar. Please, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Gisela, for the kind introduction. So I'd like to thank also Kitazato for organizing this webinar and for counting on us to present here today. So as Gisela explained, I'm going to talk about oil. This is a subject that we particularly like because we've been doing a lot of research in the last years on this subject. So the idea of this talk is that we can share with you some of our findings, and I hope they're interesting for you and they can help you on deciding what is the best for your protocols in the lab. So I'll start my talk with a brief introduction in the embryo culture system and explain why oil is considered a key component of the system in terms of helping it to maintain it stable in terms of temperature, osmolality, and pH. Then I will explain as well why it's important to have validated tests for specifically developed for oil samples to avoid problems that we know that happened in the past and still happen today with oil samples that might present toxicity, and these samples might have an impact in IVF results. So we need to develop tests that are specifically done for testing toxicity in this type of samples to avoid this to happen. And then I will present also a paper that we published recently, where we compared 13 different commercial oils that are available in the market. We did extensive research trying to characterize and compare them in terms of chemical and physical properties, and also in terms of quality. So we'll share with you some of these results. And finally, we'll present also a study, a validation study that we did for Kitazato on their newest oil, the Hypure Oil Heavy. It's one oil that Gisela just introduced to you. This is a oil with a high viscosity, and we'll see that this parameter, the viscosity, should be taken into account as well when deciding what oil to use according to the protocols that we follow in the lab. So as we all know, IVF success depends on many factors, and one of the most important is the embryo culture system, which needs to be well optimized in order to promote or support the correct development of human embryos. It's also well known that suboptimal culture conditions may lead to environmental stress, and this can result in a compromised cell function with the consequences for embryo development. And thus it's important that we select very carefully and screen each component of the embryo culture system in order to be able to achieve the best results, and to ensure that these results are consistent over time, because this means that we could have that the system is stable and that we have the laboratory under control. Of course, this is easy or easier to say than to apply in practice, because the embryo culture system is something complex It's composed by many elements that actually interact among each other, and any subtle or small change that we do in the culture system might have consequences in the final results. We know nowadays, for example, that it's quite common that laboratories adopted a protocol to culture the embryos uninterruptedly from day 0 or day 1 until day 5, day 6, or even day 7. So it's very important that we know what type of medium of the initial osmolality of this medium, of this single-step medium, if we want to adopt this policy. And if we do it, we need to know where or what type of incubators would allow us to do this. It's not the same if we culture the embryos uninterruptedly in a humid or in a dry incubator. And as we'll see also along this presentation, the oil or the type of oil that we use, depending on these protocols, might present also different results. So we could organize a webinar specific for each of these components, but today we'll focus mainly on the oil. The oil that we use nowadays and the method with micro-droplets was described for the first time many years ago, about 60 years ago. It was the first time it was described that it was possible to culture and manipulate embryos in small micro-droplets of medium underlaid with or overlaid with oil. And this method was described and is still the one that we use today because it allows us to protect the medium from potential contamination. It also has been associated that the system with micro droplets covered with oil allows us to stabilize the temperature and pH, and can also help to reduce the evaporation and osmolality changes in the medium. There's also some studies that suggested that during embryo culture there are some lipophilic substances that might be toxic for embryos, and that the oil could act also as a sink and helping in removing these substances that accumulate along the several days of embryos in culture. Although we know all these positive benefits of using oil, the reality is that there are still some laboratories having problems too. We know that there are still some laboratories that, despite we know these benefits of using oil, that prefer not to use oil in some of the procedures. For example, it's common that we see labs that still do oocyte retrievals, oocyte denudation, or even embryo transfer in dishes without oil. This is a strategy that mainly is justified to reduce costs, or because they have more difficulties on handling the embryos when the dishes are covered with oil, which is something that could be overcome with a little bit more of practice. In any case, here we have some examples from simple experiments that we do usually for the trainees that come to our training center. It's very simple to show them the importance of using oil and the consequences of not using oil. With simple experiments that we can visualize and demonstrate very easily. It's simple to show how in dishes, in typical 4-well or 5-well dishes, when the well is not covered with oil, the temperature drops much faster than in the well where the oil is present. The same with pH. In a few minutes, the oil in the wells that are not covered with oil, the pH is completely out of range if not covered with oil. And the same happens in the osmolality when we're manipulating the dishes outside the incubator in a heated stage. After a few minutes, we can notice an increase in the osmolality as a result of evaporation of the medium. So this is just a simple example with experiments that anyone can do in the lab. Let's show that how important it is to use oil in all procedures that we do in the IVF lab. Actually, the question that we have nowadays is not whether oil should be used or not. The answer is clear, it is yes. The question or the debate here is what amount of oil should be used then in the dishes. In a recent study that we published in Human Reproduction, we analyze different factors that could interfere or could affect the evaporation and changes in osmolality of the medium. And we have identified that the oil is one of the most important. And actually, the volume of oil that is used is also important. It's, for example, in a 35 mm dish, the typical dish that is used commonly for culturing embryos. If we prepare droplets with 20 microliters of medium and put the dish in a dry incubator, we can have different results if the volume of the medium is 4 milliliters, the volume of oil is 4 milliliters, or if we use only 2.7, for example. In both, there is an increase in osmolality, but we can protect better the embryos if the volume is high. So this is an example in a 35 mm dish, but it also applies for other type of dishes. For example, the 5-well dishes, when they are pre-equilibrated, even in a humidified incubator without oil, there is a significant increase in osmolality after the 6 hours of incubation of this dish in the medium. While if we want to maintain the osmolality more stable, we need to cover the huge volume of medium, in this case 700 microliters of medium. We need to cover them with oil. If in the same dishes we use micro-droplets, it's different, or we can have different results if the amount of oil is 700 microliters than if we use almost the double amount. So the more oil and the thicker the oil layer is, the better we can protect the embryos, or we can prevent the changes in osmolality. In this study, we also wanted to analyze what happens then in the time-lapse dishes, because these dishes are come with a design where we cannot change the amount of oil that we put in them. So we wanted to compare whether the design of the dish can also have an influence, and if there was some time-lapse dishes that could help us to prevent osmolality changes better than others. So what they did was to take all type of time-lapse systems that exist in the market, fill or prepare the dishes according to the instructions for use described by the manufacturer, and incubate them all in the same chamber of a dry benchtop incubator with the same amount, with the same type of medium, but changing the amount of the volume of medium that is used in each of them, following the instructions of the manufacturer. And what we've seen was interesting differences. And actually, in the dishes that had more oil, it allowed us to put more oil in them, and in those that the thicker layer of oil, the layer of oil was thicker, we've seen that we had reduced changes in osmolality than compared to the dishes where this amount of oil over the or on top of the wells was smaller. Which is I think it's interesting for the manufacturers to learn in order to consider this information when designing their own dishes. So these are just simple examples of how oil is important to be used in the embryo culture systems. However, we know as well that the oil, it can also have has adverse effects and can act as a source of toxicity in the culture system if it's not of good quality. And there are several reports where oils were identified as contaminated with toxins like peroxides, aldehydes, or even detergents like tritone, or metals like zinc, which showed that could compromise embryo development. This happens because the process of producing the oil that we use for IVF is not so simple. Actually, the oil is produced from the distillation of crude oil, and depending on how this distillation process is performed, we can have oils with different chemical compositions. So it's very important that this process is well controlled, as well as the way this oil is tested before the oil reaches the IVF labs. So to reduce eventual presence of toxins or toxicity that could compromise embryo development. We know that this is not the case in some cases, because there are examples of episodes that happened that oil with toxicity entered in the market and caused very dramatic effects in IVF results. There were some of these episodes were described and are public, and we know that more have existed. However, they were not reported, and we still have no information on what type or what exact toxicity was present in those samples. However, we know that most important is to characterize well the chemical composition of the oil. In general, the oils that we use in the labs are those that are classified as mineral or paraffin, or a mixture of both. The difference between mineral and paraffin is not clear yet. In general, those that are classified as paraffin have been associated to be more pure than mineral oils, maybe because of just a nomenclature classification according to the pharmacopoeias, or just because paraffin oils are usually or pass through more purification steps than mineral oils. What is important in here is that all oils that we use in IVF, it's clear that the better ones are those that are composed by alkanes or cycloalkanes, because they have the bonds, the hydrocarbon bonds are saturated, and therefore they're less prone, or they're more resistant to peroxidation than those that have in their composition hydrocarbons that have bonds that are unsaturated, like the alkenes or aromatic hydrocarbons. A part of the importance of the chemical composition for the quality of the oil. Another important characteristic is having a problem. Okay, here. Another important characteristic of the composition of the chemical composition of the oil is related to the viscosity. In general, the longer the hydrocarbon chain is, the more viscous is the oil. As we'll see in the next slides, this is an important parameter, and that can have an influence in the stability of the culture system as well. So the quality of the oil is therefore very important. That's why in the latest or the newest guidelines for IVF products that was launched by FDA, oil is indicated as an important product that needs to be, it's mandatory to be tested. Each lot, each batch of oil should be tested before going into the market, specifically with mouse embryo assays. However, it's clear that because there are still samples that enter in the market with the toxicity, it's clear that something is going on, because not all mouse embryo assays seem to have the same sensitivity. So knowing this, we decided to conduct a study to trying to optimize the sensitivity of the mouse embryo assays by playing or checking the effect of the type and concentration of protein that is used in the medium to conduct this type of tests. Also checking whether it would be better to have the end point of the, say, 96 hours or after 120 hours of culture in contact with the medium, with the oil, sorry. Also, we analyzed the embryo density during embryo culture, whether it was better to culture embryos individually or in group, as well as the design of the dish. So in this study that was part of Enric's PhD thesis, we analyzed these different parameters in order to optimize the sensitivity of the of the mouse embryo assay to detect peroxides in mineral oil. And what we did in this case was to expose the oil that we had to UV light, following a methodology that had been described by Otsuki before. And doing this, we were able to induce peroxidation in our oil samples. We tested these oils and we identified that there was some that had a limit of or a value of peroxide similar to the limit that is considered accepted for a product, for an oil to be launched into the market, that is close to 0.1 milli equivalents per kilogram. Then we decided to use this oil with this level of peroxides to conduct our experiments. So in this case, we compared several parameters, as I described before, and the one that resulted more interesting and where we found more interesting differences was in the type and the amount of protein that was used in the medium to test or to conduct these mouse embryo assays. Interestingly, and we know that in the past, the bovine serum albumin was the one that was mostly used to conduct mouse embryo assays. And judging by the experiments that we conducted, it was an important parameter that reduces the sensitivity of the mouse embryo assay. In fact, if we wanted to make the mouse embryo assay sensitive to test peroxides in oils, we found that it was better to use a medium supplemented with human serum albumin. And actually, it was better to use a higher amount of protein than if the test is conducted with lower amount of protein. And this is also in contrary to what had been published, because it was supposed that it had been described that the mouse embryo assays should be done with a low amount of protein. Whether in our findings, we found that for testing peroxides in oil, it's actually better to do it with higher concentrations of human serum albumin, because it's supposed that the albumin present in the medium can interact with the peroxides in the oil and help or act as a vehicle to introduce these peroxides in the embryos, making the mouse embryo assay more sensitive. So this was another interesting finding that helped us to improve the sensitivity of the assay to test peroxides in oils. Here I'll share with you some examples from these experiments. On the left side, this video we show embryos that were cultured in this oil that we knew that had a small amount of peroxides. And as you see here, when we used medium supplemented with a low amount of HSA, all embryos developed perfectly to blastocyst stage. However, when we increased the concentration of HSA and tested the same medium at same conditions, all embryos were almost exploded or completely degenerated at the end of the assay. So this could have consequences because, of course, if we do the mouse embryo assay with comply with the requirements from FDA using a low amount of protein, and this batch could have been released to the market with probably consequences for IVF results. However, we found that using a higher amount of protein, we could have to increase the sensitivity assay, and we could detect the presence of this toxin. So the quality of the oil is very important, and after having optimized the methods to increase the sensitivity of the mouse embryo assays, we decided then to conduct another study to evaluate what's going on with the oils that are already in the market and that are commercially available and launched to the IVF labs. So we conducted this study where we analyzed and compared 13 different commercial oils according to their physical characteristics, mainly viscosity and density. We also analyzed them chemically to evaluate what was the peroxide levels when the bottles were opened and their susceptibility or their proneness to peroxidation. We also evaluated how their characteristics interfere with pH equilibration and the stability of the dishes outside of the incubator, and also studied the dynamics of the temperature inside and outside of the incubator for each of these type of oils, as well as their capacity to reduce evaporation when putting the dishes in a dry incubator for 7 days. Finally, what was very interesting as well was to compare their quality using this protocol, this sensitive protocol that we had developed in the previous study. So we started analyzing the viscosity and density of the 13 different oil brands, and here we found interesting things as well, because we've seen that, as you see here in this table, that although manufacturers tend to describe the oils as heavy and light, we found that there's that are some oils that have intermediate viscosity, although they are considered heavy. For example, if you see here in this column, the viscosity of the oils can be very different, and there are some oil with an intermediate viscosity that are considered as heavy. Those should be considered differently. Another interesting thing that was also, I think we found also interesting, was the density of these oils. We tend to mix viscosity and the density terms, and we've seen that they don't correlate to each other. We can have a low viscous oil with a high density, for example. And then in these 13 samples of oils, we analyzed the peroxides, and we've seen that in this case, all oils complied with what is considered acceptable for an oil to have a lower than 0.1 levels of peroxides. In all cases, they all had this lower than this amount, which was okay. But when we exposed these oils to sunlight, we've seen that there was no correlation between their chemical or their physical characteristics and their susceptibility to oxidate. So in general, all oils exposed to sunlight resulted in an increase in peroxides levels, meaning that regardless of their viscosity, density of pre-washing, all oils are sensitive to exposure to sunlight. This isn't something that's not new, and that's why the way we handle the oils in the lab, it's very important, and we need to protect them always from the sunlight. In regards to the experiments we did to compare the oils in terms of pH equilibration and stability, we found that for all types of oils that were tested, a minimum 3 to 6 hours it's needed or needed for the pH in the medium to reach a value of 7.4. However, if we want the dish to be completely equilibrated, we need to wait between 12 to 16 hours. However, we found that if we use low viscosity oils, this time that the medium needs to reach a correct pH, the time is much faster when we use low viscosity oils compared to when high viscosity oils are used, meaning that if we use high viscosity oils, we need more time for the pH to be correctly equilibrated. On the other side, when we have these dishes completely equilibrated and take them out of the incubator, we have seen that those that were prepared with high viscosity oils are generally able to keep the pH stable for a longer period of time outside the incubator than those that had been prepared with low viscosity oils. And this correlation, again, is not associated to the density, but with the viscosity. In terms of temperature, we've also have seen that there are some differences depending on the type of oil that is used. In general, within the first 5 minutes in all type of oils, there is a fast decrease in temperature. However, those dishes that are prepared with heavier oils, with a higher density, tend to reach a plateau at a higher temperature than those that are prepared with lower viscosity oils. In terms of how fast these dishes that have been exposed outside of the incubator recover in temperature when they are put back in the incubator, we have seen in all cases, regardless of the type of oil, the increase of temperature is similar, probably because in the benchtop incubator where we conducted this study, there was a direct heat transmission between the incubator and the bottom of the dish, which allowed the droplets of the medium to recover the temperature much faster. So in this case, the type of oil does not seem to influence on the recovery of the temperature of the dishes. Finally, in these comparisons, we also wanted to evaluate the differences in terms of capacity of the oil to prevent evaporation of the medium and subsequently changes in the osmolality. So what we did was to prepare 35 mm dishes with 20 microliters droplets covered with 4 ml of oil and put them in a dry benchtop incubator for 7 days. And then we measured the osmolality and compared the osmolality that these dishes had at the beginning when they were prepared and after being exposed for 7 days in this dry benchtop incubator. And in here again we found very interesting differences. Seeing that usually or for all oils that we tested, those that were more viscous tend to protect better and to avoid big changes in evaporation of the medium much better than those that were less viscous, and this was a very interesting nonlinear correlation. So the more viscous the oil is, the better we could protect or we could prevent the osmolality changes, and this was related with the viscosity but not with the density of the water. Also, we found that these results in terms of changes in osmolality were not related to whether the oil was pre-washed with water or with medium, but was the important characteristic was the viscosity of the oil. Finally, in this study, we then decided to analyze the quality of the different oils using or applying the most sensitive mouse embryo assay that we had optimized previously. And we found very interesting results because, as I said before, these oils were commercially available. They were in the market. They were being used in IVF labs, and we found that 2 of them did not reach the acceptable criteria for a mouse embryo assay, meaning that the blastocyst formation rates were lower than 80%. In one of them, that the blastocyst formation rate was as low as 10%. So this is very important, meaning that some manufacturers are not doing mouse embryo assay that has been validated or specifically designed to test oils. Interestingly also, when we added different endpoint and cultured the embryos not just until 96 hours but up to 120 hours, we also noticed differences in the percentage of blastocysts that were able to completely hatch. And found that one of another oil had the percentage of completely hatched blastocysts was significantly lower compared to the other oils, meaning that probably the quality of this oil was not as good as we wanted. And finally, we did this triple differential staining protocol to evaluate the quality of the blastocysts in terms of cell numbers in the inner cell mass through ectoderm, and as well as number of apoptotic cells. And in here, we found even this is a method that we have to make the assay even more accurate, and to judge the quality of the blastocysts that are obtained in the assay. And here we found additional differences in terms of quality of the oils, in terms of mean number of cells present in the inner cell mass or in the trophectoderm of these blastocysts. So with this study, we were able to demonstrate that the characteristics of the oil can interfere in their ability to protect the culture system, and that there are oils present in the market with significant differences in terms of quality, which can have repercussions in our ability or in the way we culture the embryos and the quality of these the embryos that we can get in the lab. Finally, I would like to share with you the results from this study that we conducted for Kitazato with the Hypure heavy oil. Basically, we know that in the market there are several oils, as I described before. They can have different viscosities. In this study, Kitazato wanted us to compare the different oils present in the market that are shown here in this graph. And we started by comparing them in terms of comfortability for the end user and how these oils are used in terms of handling. And we've seen, according to our experience and the test that we did, we found that it is more comfortable to work with oils that are more viscous than those that are less viscous, because we found that it's less frequent oil spillage and the cell and the dish sealing, or even medium droplets displacement when the oil is more viscous. Unfortunately, I think the video doesn't work very well, but you can clearly see here that when we use oils with a lower viscosity, the droplets tend to move much more than when the oil is more viscous. Then we did a battery of tests that we had optimized in the study that I presented before, and compared the Hypure oil against 8 other oils present in the market. And because this oil is so viscous, the results were clear and corroborate our previous findings, and showed that the Hypure oil was able to maintain the pH outside the incubator for a longer period within an acceptable range than other oils that are less viscous. Also, the Hypure oil showed to be very good on preventing evaporation of the medium after culturing the dishes for 7 days in a dry incubator. So the rates of evaporation in the medium when the droplets were covered with this high viscous oil from Kitazato were much lower than with the oils that had a lower viscosity. And in terms of quality, we did the mouse embryo assay following the protocol more sensitive, and we found that when the embryos are cultured in this oil, the percentage of blastocysts, of expanded blastocysts by 5 days in culture were very good, over 96%, and that the quality of these embryos in terms of total number of cells per blastocyst was also very good. It showed to be the oil where the blastocyst had a higher number of cells. So with this, I'd like to conclude saying that it's clear that the embryo culture system is quite complex, and any change in the system might have consequences. So we need to consider all these in order to avoid an impact, or if we want to improve our embryo developmental rates and our clinical results. Using oil in all procedures during handling and during culture of gametes and embryos is mandatory to reduce fluctuations in temperature, pH, and osmolality. There are several factors that are associated with evaporation of the medium and should be considered to avoid osmotic stress in the embryos. The most important are the humidity level inside incubators, the thickness and viscosity of the oil that is used to cover the medium. We've seen also in the time-lapse dishes that the type of culture dish is also important, as well as the way we prepare these dishes. And it's also important the initial osmolality and the type of culture medium that we use, as well as the volume of the medium and the ratio between the surface of medium that is exposed to air and the volume of oil. It's clear that commercial oils that we have nowadays, they can present different viscosities and different densities, and both do not correlate to each other. And from our findings, we understand that high viscosity oils tend to be more effective in maintaining temperature, as well as in reducing the medium evaporation and preventing changes in pH and than those that are less viscous. Also, it's important to optimize the mouse embryo assays, specifically to test oil samples, because we've seen that there's still some oils that some have enough quality to be launched, and it's important that they are tested properly to avoid surprises when we culture or when they are used in human IVF. And quality, there are differences in quality, as we've seen in the mouse embryo assays, in terms of number of blastocysts, number of percentage of expanded blastocysts after conducting the assay, as well as in the number of cells that were found in these blastocysts. As a summary and a take-home message, I think it's important that we remind that the volume of oil used is also important. The thickness of this oil layer can have influence in the time that the dishes take to be completely calibrated. Usually, the thinner the oil layer is, the shorter the calibration time is needed. However, if we want to reduce changes in pH outside incubator, as well as changes in evaporation or osmolality, we need to use high oil volumes. And the same applies for viscosity. Low viscosity oils tend to equilibrate faster. The dishes prepared with low viscosity oils tend to equilibrate faster. However, when we use high viscosity oils, we can have the embryos more protected, and there's the way we handle the dishes, it can also be more comfortable. Among everything, the quality of the oil is also the most important. So with this, I'd like to finish by thanking our team in Embryotools, and in particularly Enric Meesters, as most of the data that I presented here were part of his PhD that he just defended. So I'd like to thank him, as well as our entire team. And also thank you all for your attention. So if you have any question, we'll be happy to answer.
So thank you, Nuno, very much for your presentation. Wonderful, as always.
Thanks, Gisela.
I just have a couple of slides. Okay. So, well, just to finish this up, and as Nuno has presented already, so the oil is an important component of the embryo culture system, as it works as a protective barrier to prevent the quick evaporation of the medium and to keep the specimen safe from external contaminants during the in vitro culture. It also plays an important role in maintaining the stability in terms of temperature, pH, and osmolality, So Kitazato Hypure oils are pre-washed pharmaceutical-grade paraphenols manufactured with high-quality control tests and less endotoxin levels in the market. The Hypure oils are available with different densities and viscosities to better suit different laboratory needs. The light version is double washed and allows easy pipetting and a quicker equilibration. On the other hand, the heavy oil provides extensive protection and insulation of gametes and embryos, especially during an extended culture or when using time-lapse incubators. So glass and PET bottles are available in different sizes. They are suited to be stored at room temperature and can be used for 28 days after the first opening. They allow a comfortable and safe stock management in the lab. So if you want to learn more about our oils, you have in the handouts section in the right panel, you can download some documents regarding the information of our oils and the study that Nuno has already presented. So let's move forward to the Q&A. So let's see if we have any questions from the audience. We have one. Well, you already addressed this, Nuno, but somebody said that for dry incubators, do you recommend a high viscosity oil then?
Yeah, so based on the results and the findings from the studies that I presented, it seems that the oils that have a higher viscosity tend to protect better the changes in osmolality, and to prevent evaporation of the medium better than those that are less viscous. However, it's important also the volume of oil that is used. If we need to cover and try to use the maximum amount of oil that is possible to fill in the dishes, if we want to confer the highest protection to the medium. So
okay. Because somebody commented on that, like if you have a high viscosity oil, it's possible to reduce the oil overlay. But no, you're just suggesting.
It's very difficult to prevent some evaporation of the medium to happen, even using high viscosity oils. So the recommendation is to use high viscosity oils and to use the largest amount of volume, the largest volume if you want this if you want to protect better the conditions of the culture system.
In case you are saying that the largest amount, the better, do you think that, for example, what about the lid seal? If do you use the lid or you remove it from the dish?
Yeah, this is interesting question. So we've seen that in our case we don't use the lid because we see that if we use a higher amount of oil, the benefits that we have from using this higher amount of oil compared to if we reduce the amount of oil and we put the lid are better when we have a higher amount of oil in the dishes. So to prevent the dish to seal because of using this high amount, we don't use the lid.
Okay, great. So we have another one. Well, it's a bit related, but it says I use a time-lapse incubator and a single-step media, and I don't replace the dish on day 3. So should I use a high viscosity oil in my case?
I think using the high viscosity oil, if this oil is of good quality, it's recommended. But also important because in the time-lapse dishes, usually you cannot fill them with a high volume of oil. So it's very important the type of medium that is used as well. The initial osmolality of the medium is very important. We've seen that the single-step medium, they can have different initial osmolalities. So if the initial osmolality is already very high, it's very likely that after several days in culture, that this level of osmolality might be in a level that might be detrimental for the embryos. So so the type of single step medium that is used is important, and if the medium that is being used in this lab has a high initial osmolality, it might be better to replace the medium in the middle of the culture period.
Okay, great. So another question. Is it okay if I use light oil, like a light oil for pickup dishes, denudation ICSI, and a high viscosity oil only for the embryo culture? What do you recommend to use one for everything?
I think it simplifies if we use one for everything. On one side, it simplifies the way we work. And on the other hand, as you've seen, the high viscosity oils can protect or can offer more protection also when we handle the embryos outside the incubator in terms of pH. For example, we've seen when we compare the time that the pH needs to be out of range in heavy oils or in high viscosity oils or in low viscosity oils, it's much larger in the high viscosity than in the low viscosity, for example, or the temperature. The temperature reaches a plateau at a higher temperature in the high viscosity oils than in the low viscosity. So also for handling, I think it would be interesting to use high viscosity oils.
Good. Well, the following one is how you decide to use light or heavy oil according to the incubator types, dry or not. So it's something that...
Yeah, I mean, we are not saying that light oils cannot be used. What we're saying is that we should know the characteristics of a culture system and then decide which protocol to use. So in case you are using a light oil and your incubators are dry, it's convenient that you, for example, replace the dishes after 2 or 3 days in culture. So this is also possible. If you have high viscosity oils in a humidified incubator, probably you have margin to leave or to do uninterrupted culture in a more protective way than if you use dry incubators, for example. So, I mean, there's several options in the market. We need to be aware of each detail that we've been publishing and so on to decide what protocol to follow. But we're not saying that is not possible. But okay, if we work with some type of incubator or some type of oil, then we need to understand that we cannot do the same things that we use different types of incubators of different types of oil or medium.
Very clear. Whatever laboratory has to do their own setup and testing, right?
Exactly.
So, well, next one is how long can the oil be kept or equilibrated at 37 degrees inside the incubator without deterioration? I think you know that some embryologists, they tend to put the oil first 1 day before and then they prepare the dish the day. So what's your recommendation about that?
Yeah, this is something that some laboratories are doing. Actually, we had some experience in doing this also. We found that it's more practical to prepare the dishes directly without having oil equilibrated in the incubator. So if we prepare them in the day before use and let them equilibrate properly for 12-14 hours, these dishes are ready to be used without the need to have the oil pre-equilibrate or prepare the dishes with pre-equilibrated oil. It's difficult to say for how long the oil lasts if it's left in the incubator at 37 degrees. because we've seen that the oil might be susceptible to peroxidation if exposed to high temperatures for too long. Maybe it's safer if we just prepare the dishes the day before with non-pre-equilibrated oil. But this is something that the laboratories need to also to validate in-house.
Yeah, their own protocol. Sure.
Yeah.
So
what we do in our case as well, because I know that also sometimes it's difficult to know exactly how many dishes are going to be used on a particular day. So it's convenient to have pre-equilibrated oil already to prepare the dishes and use them on the same day. So what we do is to have, usually you have dishes where that we fill with oil, but we don't put the droplets of medium. And these dishes are replaced every 2 or 3 days after being prepared. And in case we need them to be used on that day, we just need to have the medium. And because the oil is already pre-calibrated, the dish is ready to be used within a few hours, because once the oil is saturated with the CO2, the medium equilibrates the pH much faster. So this is something that it can be done without the need to have the entire bottle in the incubator that might release the VOCs, or oil might absorb more toxins from the environment.
You mentioned that you do this underlay dish setup. You know, with the heavy oil, you can do that. Put the oil first and then the droplet. So that's why you can do that in that way.
Yeah.
Equilibrating the oil in the dish, and then after that, just placing the droplets underneath the oil.
Yeah, that's
the oil, they do not fuse. They do not merge.
Yeah, this is also an advantage that I mentioned in terms of handling. When we do this with high viscosity oils, this helps to prevent the droplets of medium to move from their original position. So it's a type of oil that offers this comfort for the dishes, for the droplets not to move from their position when we use this, when they are prepared with the underlaid method. In this case, the droplets, because they are done under the oil, the droplets have a volume, usually they have a spheric shape, and if the oil is not too viscous, they might move much easier than if in high viscosity oils.
And doing the underlay dish setup, so you reduce also the evaporation risk and osmolality change during dish setup. So it's another advantage.
Yeah, exactly. This is one of the or the main reason why we prefer to follow this protocol, because this way the medium is never exposed to air, so you ensure that when you put it under the oil, because it has not been exposed to air, the osmolality does not change.
Okay, I have just one quick question before we end. Well, I think this is more for me, the question, because can the heavy oil be stored at 8 degrees or must be at room temperature? I mean, the oils, you can store them at room temperature with no problem. And so there's no need to put them in the fridge to occupy space. But if you are willing to store it in the fridge at 8 degrees, you can do it without any problem. Just take care that, or consider that maybe the viscosity will increase when it's cold, and then at room temperature you can leave it for a few minutes, so it's easier to handle for the dish setup. So if there's one more, okay, just the last one. If we don't have we don't answer all of the questions online, we will ask you to leave your emails and we will answer them afterwards. So all the questions will be answered with no problem. So just the last one. Any suggestion on how to minimize peroxidation in the oil and becoming embryotoxic in terms of handling in the lab? well, you said the light, right? Light
Yeah.
exposure.
We've seen the light is one of the most important. Actually, we use light to induce peroxides in oils so that we could have a toxic sample to test and to optimize our mouse embryo assays. So in a clinical use, it's very important that you protect the oil from high temperatures and also from the light.
Okay. Keep the bottle inside the box then.
Exactly.
Okay, so I think we ran out of time, but it was very interesting. Thank you, Nuno, for always, as always, to share
No.
your knowledge with us. And
It was a real pleasure, and I would like to congratulate you also for conducting the session so well, and also Kitazato for promoting this type of events, because I think they're important to exchange knowledge, and they might contribute for embryologists to take the best decision for their embryos.
thanks, Nuno. Okay, we see each other soon, hopefully in person.
Yeah.
Thanks
so.
everybody for joining today. So we will keep in touch. If you have more questions, you can ask all the time. Okay. Bye bye. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.